Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I wanted to review Callisto Protocol, so without further ado, let's get to it. There are a few points I wanted to touch on regarding the first half of the game because I was able to grab some gameplay footage during the first half and also the beginning hours of the second half. Here we go, here are my thoughts. First off, gameplay. Let's talk about the combat mechanics of the game. I think Callisto Protocol overall really stands out in this department because off the top of my head, I really can't remember any other game coming this close to how the combat looks and feels in this game. The only other game I can think of which had somewhat of a robust melee mechanic going for it was Resident Evil 6, and even in that game, the melee combat wasn't really that much expanded on. I know that you can pull off some melee attacks when the enemy is staggered, but other than that, there was really no real emphasis on melee combat. And the other game that I can think about is Silent Hill, of course, the entire Silent Hill series. But even then, Silent Hill's mechanics and core combat have always felt a little bit more clunkier to me. So compared to Callisto Protocol, I think overall, in regards to its gameplay and combat mechanics, I think it really stands out and it really helps the overall game. And basically, that's the reason that I see myself coming back to this game every once in a while just to enjoy the combat mechanics, right? So, what about it? I think the Stumbaton, they really did a great job just with the overall feel of the Stumbaton and how you can basically crush the enemies and the sound effects that accompany each and every hit that you land on your enemies really drives home the fact that you are wielding this heavy weapon which is used for maiming the poor prisoners under your control. So it is really great. And when you hit the enemies, like I said, the sound effects that they have in mind for this game and the squelching and all the bones crunching, it's all great and it's all really, really good. And in my opinion, it doesn't get old at all. And there is also a level of strategic variance to this whole thing, right? So later in the game, when the enemies are a little bit tougher, namely they can sprout tentacles, you would have to hit those tentacles either with your stun baton or with your pistol. So you have strategic variance there as well. And like I said, now that you can wield weapons, you can also shoot the enemies in different parts and different limbs. So you can exploit the gameplay, the game as well in that regard. So maybe you can shoot off their legs and they start crawling on the ground, much like the necromorphs from Dead Space. And now that opens the enemies up for more melee attacks, and maybe you can get rid of them earlier. While the other enemies are trying to close distance on you, you'll be able to get rid of the ones that are closer to you earlier, or vice versa. So you have a level of strategic variance to the gameplay, which is always a welcome thing in my opinion. And never mind the fact that you can also obtain the grip module, which basically acts the same as the kinesis module back in Dead Space. So it basically holds the same value and it does the same thing. Melee, you'll be able to grab the enemies and throw them around, throw them into hazards, maybe throw them off ledges. So you'll have all of that gameplay variance as well. And again, that's always a great thing. Adds layers of strategic variety to the game, which is always great. So, in terms of gameplay, at least for the first half, I believe that it's been pretty good so far. I have enjoyed it somewhat, and I can see myself coming back to it later as well. Now, a little bit about the second half, at least for the first couple of hours, I should say, where you are basically down in the mines. I haven't reached the Arcus colony yet. And when you're down in the mines, though, you come across these enemies that are blind. And the gameplay, in my opinion, in those areas takes a nosedive because the blind enemies they can be easily exploited. You can basically stealth kill your way throughout the whole level, and even though you make a lot of noise taking them out, the other enemies that are beside them or within the close vicinity of them won't be able to hear you. Even though lore wise, you basically hear that these types of enemies have evolved in the mines, and basically it means that they have evolved in a way which now they can hear much, much better than what they used to. But, anyways, that's besides the point, I guess, since we're just talking about gameplay. I think in this video I will mainly talk about the gameplay and the visual representation of the game. I don't want to touch on any story points. Maybe I come back to the story points later. Uh, but overall, I think gameplay and visual representation do take a much more of a precedence for this video at least. So overall, gameplay has been somewhat enjoyable, I would say. I think in some aspects, though, because the enemy variety isn't there is not much else you can do with gameplay. Now, I did say that there is variety in it, but the variety that you come across really can only do so much when you are basically going up against the same two or three types of enemies throughout the entire game. I know I have replayed it, but I haven't replayed it fully. I know there's going to be boss fights. I haven't reached the first boss fight yet, but I think when you reach the first boss fight after that, there's going to be two more times that you basically go up against the same boss. So not even the boss fights are that varied. And the enemies themselves, you basically have your run-of-the-mill regular zombie that's gonna rush you down, and then you have the other variant which basically spits from afar and tries to snipe you from afar when you're, standing far away from it. And those are called spitters, I think. Or you can call them splitters because, their head is split open. Anyways, bad joke. But so there are these two types of enemies, and there's the other one that I mentioned, the blind one that you come across in the second half during its first couple of hours. I think in the mines and also in the colony, you come across those guys as well. And then there's the other one that runs on all fours that you also have to face during the first half. Now, I think the level design itself during the first half of the game was pretty okay to me. I think there was enough variety there with all the open hazards that you can exploit to save up on ammo, especially if you're playing on harder difficulties. But overall, I think the level design left a lot to be desired. There's this level, I think it's in the Habitat Dome, where there's this big giant wood chopper in the middle of the level for some reason. There's no safety cage around the whole wood chopper thing, grinder thing. I really don't know why, but just go with it, I guess. Even though the game looks very grounded, these kind of things really take away from the whole groundedness aspect of the game. But anyways, it's still a game, like I said. But the developers' insistence of it being this very grounded, grungy, and dark survival horror game with serious tones really loses its luster when it comes to those kind of areas, right? And you basically can throw enemies into that. Now, when you run out of grip module battery, you would have to take those enemies on the regular way. Maybe you can use melee on them and just throw them into the wood chopper. And there is not much else in terms of memorable encounters during the first half. I think the only memorable encounter was that, and maybe the encounter with the creepy crawly guys that I just talked about when you first see them, basically. I think that level was also pretty good because you would have to pay attention to where the enemy is going, and because they can turn invisible, you would have to pay attention to the sounds that they make, right? And then when they make themselves visible again, you would have to basically shoot them or use melee on them. But sometimes, to me at least, it feels that he doesn't really belong in this game for some reason. I think his animations are kind of janky, and it makes me think that maybe they really half-assed it when it came to his animations and came to his overall design, because what he really does is basically turn invisible, crawl on some pillars, crawl on the geometry of the level, maybe attach himself to a ceiling here and there, and maybe, attack you while he is invisible, right? One thing I'm gonna say overall regarding gameplay is that, yeah, there is not much enemy variety, and the ways you can take on your enemies really boils down to just melee and using the grip module and not much else. I know there are weapons in the game as well, but the weapons basically all act the same. I basically go to either the pistol or the riot gun, and I am good. I don't think the tactical pistol or the skunk gun really make that much of a difference, to be honest with you. But if you want to add, I guess, a minimal amount of variance to what you can do regarding the weapons, you can also go for them as well. But I think the pistol and the riot gun, do pretty much everything, especially if you upgrade them. Especially if you upgrade the pistol, I think it's a very reliable tool for you to pull off, counters and finish off enemies even faster. So, overall, Callisto Protocol, at least in terms of the gameplay, was somewhat enjoyable. I will come back to the gameplay as well again, but now I wanted to talk a little bit more about the visual representation of the game. So, we all know that Callisto Protocol is no slouch when it comes to the graphics department. Now, when the game first released, there were a few hiccups, let's just say, and the game didn't run really well on many different computers, even the ones that had great graphic cards, let's just say. Now, after all the patches and the fixes, I can run it pretty okay on my mediocre rig, which is always good. I can always enjoy a good looking game on my old rig, which is a welcome change. At the same time, though, I think the graphics of this game can become too much of a good thing at times, because there's a lot of detail packed into every corner of the game. Now, it is pretty good. It is pretty good to look at especially when I'm looking at my previously recorded gameplay footage. It is really pretty to look at. You'll be like, wow, this game has got it all, right? It's like looking at a movie, basically, and I'm pretty sure that the developers wanted it to look that way, and that's why there was so much emphasis on the graphics, on the sound design, and everything else, and they did a really great job on that one. So, no points deducted there, that's for sure. And the lighting of this game is awesome. The lighting, I think, helps to tell a visual story. And I think it helps the player navigate the levels. Of course, I have my opinions on that as well. It doesn't help the player all the time, it helps the player to an extent. Now, why am I saying that? I will have to come back to my point regarding the level of detail. The level of detail in this game, at least to me, is very overwhelming at times. And it basically does not help me navigate through the levels, because everywhere is so densely packed with detail. You will be kind of lost. You will be kind of lost to know where you are, where you want to go, because everywhere is basically same in regards to its detail. Now, if you want to look at it from an artistic standpoint, painters and graphic designers, anybody who has worked in any form of art, they would know that there's going to be a level of detail that you would have to adhere to. You would have to pay attention to when you're presenting a work of art, right? Especially visual artists. So I think that's called the 30-70 rule, or the 70-30 rule, if I'm not mistaken. I'm really bad with these kind of names. But, anyways, when you're talking about level of detail, the artist usually packs a bunch of detail to where they want their audience to look at, to guide their eyes, to guide their action, right? Namely, in this game, everywhere is basically packed with the same amount of detail. It is very impressive, it is very grounded and very realistic looking, But at the same time, I think it fails to guide the player really navigate the levels. Now I know this may be also due to the fact that the levels are very linear and there's not much exploration going on, so they thought maybe, hey, we could just pack as much detail as we can into every nook and cranny and call it a day because levels that we're making are, at the end of the day, very linear and there's not much exploration going on. I get that point. But at the same time, I think the game would have been much better if the level of detail was not as densely packed as it is, and there would have been a little bit of, let's just say, artistic vision when it came to guiding the player throughout the oppressive, very oppressive environment and claustrophobic environment of Callisto Protocol. Because one thing is that the game is very claustrophobic at times, and I know that's by design and it's a great thing because we're playing a survival horror game and it should be like this. But at the same time, there's going to be a level of balance and a level of equilibrium that need to be reached. Sorry, my English. That needs to be reached when you are basically going through the levels, and it helps with the overall flow of gameplay, with the overall flow of the visual presentation as well. So everywhere you look is just basically this mishmash of clutter and destruction and chaos, which from a lore standpoint, yes, does make sense, but from a gameplay standpoint, really does not make much of a sense. Even when you look back on projects such as the original Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space, you can still see that yes, the environments that they were trying to portray were very oppressive, dark atmosphere, blood, gore, violence, destruction, chaos. But at the same time, they were not as densely packed as this game is. They allowed for a little bit of breathing room and they would guide you with all of their level of detail. They wanted to show you, okay, go to that area because we have packed this much detail into it. You would be propelled towards it automatically. You would be compelled to go towards that area because you see, I don't know, a flickering light or a, much more detailed environment that basically compels you to go to it and try it out, see what's new over there, right? But this game, like I said, is just so densely packed 110% of the time that you are kind of lost. And now the developers would have to resort to some simplistic ideas to guide you through the levels. I remember during the first half, there was this objective that you had to follow, and you basically were given the task of following the red pipes. Now, why is that? Because the developers themselves knew that, okay, we may have overdid it this time around. So that's why we're just gonna give the player the objective of basically following the red pipes so that way they can reach the next mission or reach the next level. Because everything is so densely packed, we're just gonna use color saturation to kind of guide the player throughout the levels because everything else is so saturated. Now we're gonna one up it by adding even more saturation on top of it so that way the player can't miss it. So in these particular kind of cases, I think the developers kind of shot themselves in the foot here because they could have gone for more of a artistic vision and not just pack everything with dense amount of detail everywhere. Now I know it's impressive when you first look at it. It's impressive from afar, but when you're actually playing the game, it just turns into a tedious slog and it turns into a headache face basically. At least for me, it turned into a very headache inducing experience navigating through the level because not only that, not only the visual aspect of it, but also the player speed. I know it's a survival horror game, action horror game, whatever you want to call it. The player speed is very slow. I get that. You would want to have more tension by, lowering the speed of the character. I get it. But the levels are set up in a way that you sometimes have to backtrack. You sometimes veer off course in order to, grab some loot or come across some lore points, as I would like to call them. And you basically come across some, files or recordings that help with the world building aspect of the game, right? But at the same time, when you want to backtrack through these areas back to the original path that you were on, because the character's speed is so slow, it just turns into a slog. The guy basically feels like he's wading through a freaking swamp at times, right? So it's not very fun. And the fact that this game really loves its tunnels, I'm sorry, not tunnels, really loves its vents, let's say, and crevices and nooks and crannies that you can crawl into and crawl out of. It really loves these kind of spaces. Now, for whatever reason, I think the reason is basically to try to mask and hide loading screens, but it could have been done for, I guess, you know, tension purposes as well. Maybe they wanted to up the tension in some areas, as you can hear, critters running around when you're in those vents as well, which I think helps build up tension a little bit. But in subsequent playthroughs, it just loses its luster. But back to the point, the game really loves its vents, and now that you have to backtrack through all of this stuff just to get to the original point, really makes the gameplay feel tedious. And again, the level of detail is so densely packed that everywhere you look now turns into a mishmash of the same blocks of carnage, goo, and metal and steel that is not very fun to look at after a time. So visual variety kind of loses its variance, let's just say, in this game. Of course, in the second half, there's a snowy area that you come across, and I think that's a welcome change overall. But even that snowy area, has desaturated colors, of course, because of snow. But I guess it could have been done better. Now the lighting, like I said, is pretty good. Lighting is very realistic. The lights flicker on and off, and it just helps with the general oppressive atmosphere and claustrophobia that the game is trying to convey, right? But at the same time, everything just cannot help but look the same to me after a while. So visually speaking, even though the graphics are impressive, but after a few hours playing this game, they just turn into the same blob, at least to me. So visually, I won't give this game a very high score or high regard. Gameplay wise, so far it's been, somewhat enjoyable. It's been pretty good. I think I can see myself coming back to this game every once in a while because the melee of this game is pretty good, is really good. In some areas, like the woodchopper area, like I mentioned before, the gameplay opens up a little bit and you'll be able to try out, different ways with more freedom to tackle your enemies, right? But during the second half, at least for the first few hours where you come across the blind enemies, the gameplay just takes a nosedive. Everywhere is dark. You're even, put through some mining area, some underground colony again, which really doesn't have much of a variety when you want to compare it to the snowy area or to the prison area before it. At least in the Habitat Dome area, there was a little bit of greenery that helped with the visual representation. But again, when you reach the mining zone and you reach the colony afterwards, even though in my current replay that I did for this review, I still haven't reached the colony yet. I believe I still haven't reached the first boss fight yet. But that's besides the point. Anyways, these areas are not very tonally or visually distinct from each other. So everything is again, it's just a blob to me. It's just a mixture of the same goop that you first found when you first booted up this game. So yeah, no, it's not really good. Not really good. And the only hook that this game has is its core melee mechanics. Now, maybe I'll do another video criticizing and reviewing the second half of the game. I was also thinking about maybe I can redesign the whole woodchopper area. Maybe I can add a little bit of twist to it. I know the idea is not going to be anything genius or something like that. I'm sure the developers themselves probably came up with all these ideas beforehand. It's just that knowing the fact that this game went through a troubled development, they were not able to, touch upon many of these development aspects that they wanted to initially. And that's really the bummer because Callisto really has potential. It does have a lot of potential, and that's why I made this video in the first place, because I really still like it with all the points that I just mentioned, all the negative that I just outlined in this video. It's because that I like this game that I made this video. Otherwise, I wouldn't have cared one bit. I think Callisto really does have potential. I hope one day the developers see it. I'm sure the developers see it. It's just that the publisher would have to see it. Maybe the publisher can sell it off to another developer. Maybe they'll be able to, garner something from it. Maybe salvage something from it, and continue the franchise forward. I know that there was another game that was released. It's kind of a roguelike game. I've never tried that one. It's called Redacted. It's not even called Callisto anymore. It's called Redacted, and it just doesn't help with the franchise. You know what I mean? If you want it to be part of the franchise, might as well just call it Callisto Protocol. I don't know, Redacted. Why don't you just do that instead of just Redacted? Because it does feel like a different game. Maybe they wanted to distance themselves from the name Callisto because of you know, the initial botched launch that this game had, and it upset a lot of fans, a lot of people that were waiting for it at the time. It was basically being touted as this next generation of Dead Space. It was, basically developed by the original team, or at least some members of the original team. I really don't want to get into that because I think other people with, much higher production value have gone into it to much, much more detail than I could ever possibly hope to deliver. So, yeah, that aspect of it is known to all. I just wanted to talk about a little bit of gameplay and visual representation of the game today, namely for the first half that I did. Maybe I'll do it for the second half, like I said. Now, I know Dead Space Remake, you know, is also pretty good, which is kind of sad because, again, it's a remake that is doing better than an original IP. Now, I recently got it on a discount on Steam, so at some point I would have to replay it and review that game as well. So stay tuned for that one too. I'll probably review Chronos as well because I've heard good things about that game too. So maybe I'll review that one as well sometime down the line, I hope. Um, it to me that game also feels a little bit like Resident Evil 2 remake, especially with the bolt cutter and everything because I saw some of the gameplay as well. But overall, they're trying to add their own twist to it, which is always a welcome change. I guess we'll have to see. But overall, yeah, Callisto Protocol. If you haven't tried it, I really don't wanna spoil any story segments for you. Maybe I kind of did with the boss fights and everything, but if you haven't tried it, I would say maybe get it on a deep, deep sale. I think the game is probably on a deep sale right now, so maybe you can, try getting it. You'll have a fun time if you go into it with an open mind, and if you want to try out a pretty cool melee system. In my opinion, it's pretty cool because it adds variety to the game, even though there's not much variety to go on. But the melee system itself is pretty cool, and it gives you a lot of options in order to deal with your enemies, right? And also, there is this riot mode in the game as well, which is kind of reminiscent of the mercenaries mode in the Resident Evil series. Riot mode is basically the entire gameplay distilled down to its core components, which is shooting and melee mechanics, which is great. And that mode, I had quite a lot of fun in that mode as well. I think that's what kept me coming back to it, to be honest with you, after a while. I just wanted to try that one as well. Maybe I'll just do a separate video on that. Man, I'm just thinking about a whole lot of videos right now. Maybe I won't deliver, so I better not be talking about what I'm gonna do in the future. Well, we'll see. So, anyways, if you haven't tried it, I recommend picking it up on a discount, or if it is on, or check it out. Maybe it's on, what's that thing called? Maybe it's on Game Pass. If it's on Game Pass, maybe pick it up, see if you like it or not. If not, get a discount on this Steam when it's available, of course. Don't pay full price for this game. Not at all. Wait for a deep, deep sale. See if you like it, because I think if you get it on a deep sale, yeah, it's pretty good. That's actually what I did at the time. I waited for all the patches to come out, and I waited for a deep sale, and I think I probably got it for 20 bucks or something. I don't really remember. But anyways, yeah, if you get it for that price, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. It's a good time, and you'll probably enjoy it for what it is. But anywho, if you stuck around this far and you tolerated my annoying voice, I really appreciate it. I hope you guys found something to like in this video. I hope you guys resonated with this video. If you have any ideas, any opinions regarding Callisto Protocol, regarding my type of content, please do let me know. Share down in the comments. I would really welcome it. And at the same time, if you want to support this channel, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you have the time. If not, you know what I will always do. I will hate you for the rest of my life and rest of your life. But anyways, I really appreciate it, guys. So thank you for sticking around. I'll see you in the next one. Take care and bye.